In part 2 of Module 6, we will focus in more specifically on the figure of Hermes and look at how he has evolved in some interesting ways over the course of time. This has partly to do with his assimilation with other deities from the ancient world, as I explained when we were looking at the figure of Aphrodite, that in the Hellenistic period, so when the Greeks colonized the ancient Near East, there was this process of comparison that took place where gods from different localized cultures were equated with one another, and people came to the conclusion in many instances that all cultures sort of shared the same gods, they were just known by different names. So in this instance, the point of comparison is the Egyptian god Thoth, who is depicted in ancient Egyptian iconography as half human and half ibis, or sometimes half baboon. This is typical of ancient Egyptian deities, and something that the ancients themselves were puzzled by and remarked on the kind of hybrid nature of Egyptian deities. His Egyptian name is pronounced probably something like Thowit, although we refer to him as Thoth in modern usage. He was worshipped at several shrines throughout ancient Egypt and was associated with things like writing, magic, science, mathematics, astronomy, all sort of advanced forms of knowledge. He was also a mediating god between forces of good and evil, as well as a scribe. He is closely associated with language and the art of writing. In Egyptian texts, he is described as a god who knows secrets, who distinguishes speech. He's a kind of courier of humankind, and is associated, much like Hermes, with journeys, crossings, and he's also a slayer of monsters. We find Thoth appearing in a dialogue of Plato, the Phaedrus, where he is called Thuth, and he is revealed to be the inventor of numbers, writing systems, as well as games. So you can well imagine why people in the Greco-Roman world would have naturally equated Thoth with the figure of Hermes. Now in the passage from Plato, we find Thuth here, or Thoth, being described as, "You are most ingenious, Thuth. But one person has the ability to bring branches of expertise into existence, another to assess the extent to which they will harm or benefit those who use them. The loyalty you feel to writing as its originator has just led you to tell me the opposite of its true effect. It will atrophy people's memories. Trust in writing will make them remember things by relying on marks made by others from outside themselves, not on their own inner resources, and so writing will make the things they have learnt disappear from their minds. Your invention is a potion for jogging the memory, not for remembering. You provide your students with the appearance of intelligence, not real intelligence, because your students will be widely read, though without any contact with a teacher, they will seem to be men of wide knowledge when they will usually be ignorant. And this spurious appearance of intelligence will make them difficult company." So in fact, in this passage from Plato, the speaker is being very critical of Thoth and the written arts as a kind of tool that many people overly rely on instead of remembering information and developing their intellectual faculties. They are too dependent on book learning and information that is found in written form. Nonetheless, in spite of this sort of negative critique of a Hermetic sort of figure, Hermes himself takes on an important role in a particular stream of Greco-Roman religious thought and philosophy. And this is often referred to as the Hermetic tradition. Sometime between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era, we see the emergence of wisdom texts and philosophical and religious treatises that are attributed to a deity that is essentially a hybrid of Hermes and Thoth. So there's a direct syncretism here. Many of these works are written in the form of dialogues, and Hermes here appears as a revealer figure and a wise man called Hermes Trismegistus. This term Trismegistus means thrice greatest, and in ancient Greek there was if you wanted to refer to something in the superlative, so as the kind of ultimate representation of a particular quality, you could say, 3 times something. So thrice greatest simply means the greatest of the greatest. And these texts are really a kind of blending of ancient Platonism and Pythagorean ideas, as well as a kind of philosophical monotheism. So in many of the treatises, they point to the existence of a source of all being, or a kind of one who gives birth and emanates the universe. So the Hermetic writings, which are collectively referred to as the Corpus Hermeticum, it contains cosmology texts, astronomical and astrological writings, as well as alchemical treatises, and some of these became extremely popular in the Renaissance. So the figure of Hermes, especially Hermes Trismegistus, made its way into the intellectual traditions of the Renaissance period and is present in early modern alchemy. So we have an example on this slide of a 16th century alchemical manuscript. So remember, Hermes is sort of central to this whole tradition, where we have the depiction of a hermaphrodite, so a figure that is a combination of male and female characteristics. And this is interpreted by some scholars as a symbol of integration and the kind of union of opposites. And again, if we go back to someone like Carl Jung, who we talked about in the last part of this module, he was extremely interested in the alchemical tradition because he didn't believe that the medieval and Renaissance alchemists were simply interested in transforming substances, that this was all a kind of symbolism for psychological transformation, which is what Jung himself was most interested in. Now this provides a useful segue into another transformative aspect of the figure of Hermes, and this is connected to the figure of Hermaphroditus, who is in fact a child of Hermes and Aphrodite. This figure is also seen as a shapeshifter and trickster archetype, a god of fertility and sexuality with both male and female characteristics, which were taken on after a merger with the nymph Salmacis, and we find traditions about this in ancient mythological storytelling. One of the most popular versions of the Hermaphroditus story comes from Ovid's mythological poem, The Metamorphoses, or the Transformations. Now, we'll be saying more about Ovid and the sort of stories he tells in the next module, in particular as we examine some aspects of how Ovid is received in the modern day, especially stories relating to Apollo. But before we do that, we will look at how Ovid tells the story of Hermaphroditus. So this text comes from the 1st century before the Common Era and is really a long series of transformation narratives that are all interlinked with one another. And at the point in the narrative where he tells the story of Hermaphroditus, he references Salmacis, who is a kind of female nature spirit. He says, Salmacis did not go near him yet, though she was quick to go to him, waiting until she had calmed herself, checked her appearance, composed her expression, and merited being seen as beautiful. Then she began to say, Youth, O most worthy to be thought a god, if you are a god, you must be Cupid, or if you are mortal, whoever engendered you is blessed, and any brother of yours is happy, any sister fortunate, if you have sisters, and even the nurse who suckled you at her breast. But far beyond them, and far more blessed is she, if there is she, promised to you, whom you think worthy of marriage. If there is someone, let mine be a stolen pleasure. If not, I will be the one, and let us enter into marriage together. So it's normally in the stories told by Ovid in the Metamorphoses, it's kind of male mythological figures, pursuing female mythological figures. Here the roles are somewhat reversed, as Salmacis is trying to engage in a relationship. After this, the naiad, that is Salmacis, was silent. A red flush branded the boy's face. He did not know what love was, though the blush was very becoming. Apples are tinged with this color, hanging in a sunlit tree, or ivory painted with red, or the moon eclipsed, blushing in her brightness, while the bronze shields clash in vain to rescue her. This is a typical sort of Ovidian comparison that's commonplace in the Metamorphoses, these nature similes and metaphors. The nymph begged endlessly, at least a sister's kiss, and about to throw her arms around his ivory white neck, he said, Stop this, or I shall go and leave this place, and you. Salmacis, afraid, turning away, pretended to go, saying, I freely surrender this place to you, be my guest. But she still looked back and hid herself among the bushes in the secluded woods on her bended knees. But he, obviously at leisure, as if unobserved, walks here and there on the grass and playfully. At the end of his walk, dips his feet and ankles in the pool. Then, quickly captured by the coolness of the enticing water, he stripped the soft clothes from his slender body. Then, we're told, she was truly pleased, and Salmacis was inflamed with desire for his naked form. The nymph's eyes blazed with passion, as when Phoebus's likeness is reflected from a mirror that opposes his brightest unclouded orb. She can scarcely wait, scarcely contain her delight, now longing to hold him, now unable to keep her love to herself. He, clapping his open palms to his side, dives into the pool, and leading with one arm and then the other, he gleams through the pure water, as if one sheathed an ivory statue, or bright lilies behind clear glass. I have won, he is mine, the Naiad cries, and flinging aside all her garments, she throws herself into the midst of the water. So he thinks that Seleucus has left this area of the wilderness, but she comes back to dive into the pool along with him. She held him to her, struggling, snatching kisses from the fight, putting her hands beneath him, touching his unwilling breast, overwhelming the youth from this side and that. At last she entwines herself face to face with his beauty, like a snake, lifted by the king of birds and caught up into the air, as Hermaphroditus tries to slip away. Hanging there, she twines around his head and feet and entangles his spreading wings in her coils, or as ivy often interlaces tall tree trunks, or as the cuttlefish holds the prey, it is surprised underwater, wrapping its tentacles everywhere. So Aphroditus here has been trying to reject the advances of Seleucus, but she imposes herself on him nonetheless. This is a typical sort of narrative arc that we find in the Metamorphoses. Again, we'll be saying more about that in the next module. The descendant of Atlas holds tight, denying the nymph's wished for pleasure. She hugs him and clings as though she is joined to his whole body. It is right to struggle, perverse one, she says, but you will still not escape. Grant this, you gods, that no day comes to part him from him, or him from me. So she's so overwhelmed by her desire for him that she prays to the gods that they should be joined permanently. Her prayer reached the gods. Now the entwined bodies of the two were joined together, and one form covered both. Just as when someone grafts a twig into the bark, they see both grow joined together and develop as one. So when they were mated together in a close embrace, they were not two, but a twofold form, so that they could not be called male or female, and seemed neither or either. So this pursuit of Seleucus, this pursuit of Hermaphroditus by Seleucus leads to the integration of the two figures into a singular form, and this leads to this iconographic representation of the kind of hybrid male-female figure that we saw in the alchemical manuscript. When he saw now that the clear waters which he had penetrated as a man had made him a creature of both sexes, and his limbs had been softened there, Hermaphroditus, stretching out his hands, said, but not in a man's voice, Father and Mother, grant this gift to your son, who bears both your names. Whoever comes to these fountains as a man, let him leave them half a man, and weaken suddenly at the touch of these waters. Both his parents, moved by this, granted the prayer of their twin-formed son and contaminated the pool with a damaging drug. So Hermaphroditus here gets to utter his own prayer, and his parents, which again Hermes and Aphrodite, respond accordingly. So like Hermes himself, the figure of Hermaphroditus is an interesting character that is involved with transitions, boundary crossings, passage from one state to another, but also this kind of idea of the unification of opposites, which is something we saw in the idea of the light and the dark Hermes, but also in more kind of alchemical and hermetic speculations about movements from diversity to unity. This is very much at the center of a number of streams of particularly Platonic philosophical tradition from antiquity, in which mythological figures and myth stories like Hermes continue to play an important role. So we'll stop there for today, and in our next module we will look at the figure of Apollo and Artemis, another interesting pairing of deities.